native plants. As I've previously mentioned, you know, nowadays with everybody, with all the land being taken up through development and 7 billion people on the planet, really using native species and protecting land is paramount in this day and age. So, you know, I really am an advocate of using native plants and protecting land. So I'm going to talk about why native plants are an important thing for people to use and for us to protect. So people ask me, what is a native plant? And it's one that grew here prior to European settlement. And people often ask, well, how do they know? Who took records? And a lot of the time, they were, you know, as soon as we came over here from Europe and settled the lands, we sent different basic, you know, drawings or plants to different botanists, and they looked over them. And we also looked at, you know, fossils like the limestone that we have. You can see fossils, also peat bogs, like they were talking about. Some of the peat bogs near the Kettle Lakes on the Moraine have, you know, pollen deposits and stuff. So they've been able to really put together about what plants were here prior to European settlement and what plants have been brought here since. So what they're considering this day and age is the Homogeocene, because we're moving plants all over the place, and by doing so, we're losing a lot of diversity in doing so. The reasons for using native plants is very important. You know, they've adapted to the various ecological areas they're in. The insects have used them, fungus. They're very complex. If you put in a non-native plant, a lot of times there just isn't those connections that they have with other types of plants. So if you were to plant, let's say, a dense blazing star or a butterfly, which a dense blazing star is native, or a butterfly bush, the dense blazing star has much more connections with other things like bees and fungus and all those great things. They also do the best job of providing food for local wildlife. Many plants are larval hosts for different butterflies. Many plants are good pollinators and have nectar and pollen for the local bees and butterflies. A lot of our bees and butterflies are becoming rare, so it's really nice when people use these plants, especially in urban areas. So these butterflies and birds and stuff have little islands that they can come around and use these plants so they can make it through their migration or just wherever they're kind of going. I'm not going to go over the next slides in detail, but if anybody wants to email myself, I can send them. These are plants that attract butterflies, and these are all basically larval hosts, the next 3 slides. So it'll be like, you know, the New Jersey tea has the mottled dusky wing as its larval host. The turtlehead has the Baltimore checker spot. You know, the fritillaries have violets. So if you want to create a garden for butterflies, you can plant these, and they'll, you know, often lay eggs on these plants, and you can have different butterflies kind of thing. So I'm going to skip through these 3 slides, and I will send this list to anybody that's interested after the fact. Just give me a few days. Couple pictures, a monarch there pollinating a swamp milkweed. And this is our last slide. This is, again, a butterfly milkweed with a monarch, which uses it as its larval host and also gets nectar from the plant as well. It provides homes for many plants that are becoming rare in the wild. For example, you can see the bluish purplish flower. It's a wild lupin. So it's become quite rare. The middle plant is the ram's head lady slipper. It just grows around the Great Lakes. And same with the cylindrical blazing star, which is the pink plant on the other side that just grows around the Great Lakes. All these plants are very rare. So if you put them in your garden or you use them, there'll be you know, lots of ways that you can protect those plants, and you can also protect the pollinators and things that use them as well. They also are a lot lower maintenance than other plant species. So, you know, they conserve water. I'm not saying that if you plant these that you're going to have no maintenance, but it'll be low maintenance. A lot of them have deep roots. They can get in there. You don't have to water as much. You don't have to use other sorts of inputs. For example, fertilizers, you choose the right plants for the right locations. You won't have to fertilize, spray Roundup, or any of those sorts of things. And it's very low maintenance. Also, spirituality. So I was able to actually get a 1970s lady in a bikini in a native plant presentation. But yeah, this one lady said to me, she's like, my favorite part of growing native plants is just zenning out and enjoying my garden. So it's a nice way to reconnect with nature, and just enjoy all the different things that happen. You know, I enjoy sitting in my gardens and watching all the pollinators come by and pollinate the place. Some people worry, what will the neighbors say? You know, when I have a pile of native plants, it doesn't have to look weedy. You can make it look like a Japanese garden. You can make it look like a traditional European garden. You can do xeriscape gardens. You can do whatever you like and make plants beautiful. I mean, about a quarter to a fifth of the plants already in the horticultural trade are actually native species. So you can really make striking combinations. So I'm going to teach you guys how to build a native plant garden, or at least grow different plants if you want. The first thing I do when I'm trying to figure out what plants I would like in my area, I want to determine my soil type. And it's really interesting how to do it. You can just take, if you can see, there's an A, B, and C horizon of soil. You take some of the soil from the A and B and shake it in a jar with water, and it'll basically stratify into the different layers. So you can see if you have a lot of sand, sand's the heaviest, silt on top, or silt in the middle, and then clay on top. And then you can make decisions based on that kind of thing. And by that, you can say if it's really sandy, it's probably very dry. So you can determine how much moisture is in your soil too, and basically where it is on your landscape. So those are basically things you can do, and select the right plants for the right locations. So if I want to grill a garden, or just make myself a quick garden, I love to just go and cut my grass back, spread some compost on top, and then put newspaper or cardboard on top of that, and then put a pile of mulch over top of it and leave it for about 6 months to a year. This is also a really good way to get rid of weeds like goutweed and dog strangling vine as well. You know, leave it for a couple of years, and then you know, plant it when you know, after a certain amount of time. So as you can see, here's an example of a native plant garden. It's kind of done in the traditional European fashion, and they have lots of fall flowering plants, spring flowering plants, and all sorts of beautiful colors in there all through the year. And I chose this picture because they're in a very uppity subdivision, and you can see that everyone, you know, they've had a lot of people compliment them on how nice it looks. So I'm going to talk about how to grow plants. I was going to do more about fall blooming plants, but the thing is that we've only got like about your goldenrods and asters, so it would have been a 50-minute talk. So this way, I felt if I went over all this, I could add some interest and get people interested in native plants, and then, you know, I could explain spring flowering, summer, and fall. And I could also talk about how you can grow plants yourself. So you don't need to go to a nursery and grow them. You can do it yourself. Go out and collect some seed, and yeah, that sort of fun stuff. So plant selection, that's the first thing. What is native? As we talked about before, there's lots of great books. So you can go look at those and see what things that have been here, and you can use those and whatnot. So you want to know your species. And knowing your species is important because you don't want to, you know, put dog strangling vine or some crazy plant in your landscape kind of thing. I also collect from areas when they're least acceptable to damage. So for example, I collect from peat bogs. I usually go there in the fall or the winter when the ground is frozen, and then I can walk on the frozen ice and just collect the seeds that are just protruding above the snow, as opposed to make damage. I collect the seeds when they're ripe and firm. And if you're not sure what you're collecting, you know, at that time of the year, and you see them ahead of time, you can flag the plant and put a marker some way. I never collect many seeds from a site. You want to leave a lot for natural regeneration and for birds and butterflies and all that sort of stuff. And you want to collect from all sorts of different plants, so you get a good genetic diversity. And then I put the seed in my refrigerator. I remember when I met my wife, she was angry because I had a pile of sticky seeds in my refrigerator and beer. And so I had to buy a separate refrigerator. That had to go out the window there. So I put all my seeds in bags and labeled them A, B, C, and D with their different Latin names on them. And then there's different ways that I treat them after I clean them. When you live in a temperate area like we do in Ontario, we have inhibitors. That way, you know, like the fall plants, like the goldenrods and asters, if they're to release their seed and they're to fall in the soil and germinate, like let's say October when they're ready, they're germinate in the fall would kill them. So they have abscisic acid on the seeds, and you have to break these inhibitors down. And one of the ways you can do that is through moist cold stratification. And through moist cold stratification, it overcomes these dormancies. So I put them in, you know, sand, perlite, peat, some sort of sterilized media, about from 0 to 5 degrees Celsius in my refrigerator for up to 20 weeks, depending on the species. So that's a great way to overcome dormancy of these plants. There's also things like lilies, which need to actually be warm moist stratified. So you would take these seeds and you would put them warm for about, you know, 6 to 12 weeks. And then you would put them in your refrigerator for another 12 weeks, and then they would germinate after that. So that's another way of different species. There's some fantastic books out there that go over all these different processes. There's also scarification. These are basically the peas, the lupins, the legume family. It's interesting to note that I've had lupin seed for 20 years that still germinate. I was reading that, you know, there's been lupin seeds they found that's 10,000 years. So with scarification, you want to take a jar, add sandpaper to the jar, and shake them up for about a minute, or you can take a blade and apply the seed coat, and then soak them in water for 24 hours, and then these plants will germinate for you. So these are great methods to just add some diversity to your garden, you know, and go out and into the wild and collect some seed and have some fun. Compost. So I like to compost that's not dirt from outside when I'm actually growing a plant, because dirt from the wild compacts in pots if I'm not just going to sow these seeds directly into my garden. So I buy like some sort of sterilized mix, and that way it's got aeration, and you don't have a lot of bugs and diseases and sorts of things like that, which can really cause troubles. So then we just take these seeds and sprinkle them lightly over the soil. And some things that are really big, you can actually plant in the soil, but a lot of people don't realize that most seeds, you don't want to actually put soil over top of them. They need light to cue their germination. So, you know, I put all my stuff out in the greenhouse, and it germinates real nicely just with a light sprinkle over top. You can put a humidome or saran wrap over them so they don't dry out if you're not going to be watering them daily. So now I'm actually going to get into the meat of the discussion, which is the different native plants. And this is based from Southern Ontario. So I know there's probably some people here that are from different provinces or from different states, but I'm sure some of these plants overlap. So I'm going to talk first about the spring, then the summer, and then the fall. So this is skunk cabbage. This is the very first plant to flower in the spring, and it's great. It produces a chemical called alternative oxidase, and what it does is the alternative oxidase actually is heat, and it melts the snow, and then it comes up, and it's pollinated by carrion flies. So if you were to stick your head into the spadix of the skunk cabbage, it would have a musty odor like a carrion, kind of like rotting flesh, which it sounds bad, but unless you put your nose into it, you can't really smell it. But it's neat that carrion flies pollinate it, and they absolutely offer nothing. There's no nectar, there's no pollen. These flies get duped. They probably spend, you know, the 3 or 4 days that they live on the earth and just keep pollinating these skunk cabbages and die because there's nothing for them. So it's basically a way that they get duped. These plants are gorgeous when they're out of flower too. They have these giant leaves. They look much like hosta. So if you like hostas and you want to replace hostas in a shady area that's kind of wet, skunk cabbage is a great plant to use. Some of our other spring wildflowers are bloodroot, as you can see on the screen. The reason it's called bloodroot is if you break the rhizome or the roots, it has a kind of a red dye, and the First Nations used to use the dye to color clothes or for various things that they would use dye for. It blooms basically in April and basically the beginning of May. So it's one of the very first plants to come up. And if you can see all the little seedlings around the bloodroot, this is garlic mustard. So it's quite an invasive species. I'm going to end this presentation off with a bunch of invasive species. Some of the ones from southern Ontario. The next one is a spring ephemeral. An ephemeral is a plant that only is up for, the time that the leaves, the snow leaves, the deciduous forest, meaning, broadleaf trees, to the time the leaves come on. So they only spend about, 5 to 8 weeks a year growing, and then they go dormant. And so very short-lived. This one, Dutchman's Breeches, is quite an attractive little spring ephemeral. And yeah, it's only around for about 5 to 8 weeks. We have the trilliums. So the large flower trillium here is Ontario's provincial flower. It's gorgeous, and it not quite an ephemeral. It does go dormant a bit earlier, but it's gorgeous. En masse in deciduous forest, there can be thousands and thousands of them. The one next to it is the red trillium. And the red trillium, like the skunk cabbage, if you were to put your nose into the flower, it would have a carrion smell, and it's also pollinated by carrion flies. So very beautiful plants, the trilliums. It takes about 6 years for them to germinate before they can actually flower. So a long time for them. The one here is a mayapple. It's another nice spring wildflower that grows in woods. It can form colonies. Like the other plants I showed you are not really colony formers, but the mayapple is. So if you have a place kind of in the shade that's slightly moist and you want to see some, something ground coverish, mayapple's a great one. It's poisonous, this plant, all year round, except for when the fruit finally ripens, it's not poisonous. But I don't recommend anybody eat any of these plants. But they call it mayapple because it flowers in May, but the fruit's not actually ready till September. The one next to it's one of my very favorite woodland plants for the spring is the wild blue phlox. You can smell it from like 200 or 300 meters away, or a bunch of, and it just has such a beautiful smell. It forms a nice ground cover. It only gets up to about 1.5 feet tall, and it looks much like periwinkle. So if you want to plant something that looks like periwinkle or you're out in the wild, blue phlox is just an incredible plant. Some of the other plants here for the spring, we have the large flowered bellwort, which is a member of the lily family. If you have a really dry, shady spot, this is a great plant to use. Again, like the trilliums, very slow to grow. And the one next to it is the common blue violet. Violets have a bad reputation of being kind of aggressive, and some species like the common blue violet are aggressive, but there's some like the Canada violet that aren't aggressive. So I find they're all great in different situations. And the fritillary butterflies, that's their larval host. So if you want fritillary butterflies, which are gorgeous, the common blue violet's a great plant and a great host plant. Also, they're edible. We have Jack in the Pulpit, which is basically a tropical plant. And except for we have 2 species in this genus that live in Ontario, much more when you get down to the southern states. There's much more varieties of them. And they're a neat plant because most plants are hermaphrodites. They're both male and female on the same plant. They both produce male and female flowers. Jack in the Pulpit, during really good years where there's lots of moisture and lots of nutrients, will be females. And during droughty years or poor years, they're male. So they revert back and forth. The one beside it is wild ginger. It has beautiful heart-like leaves, and it forms a ground cover. So if you're ever out in the woods and you smell the smell of ginger, that's what it is. Probably the wild ginger, heart-like leaves, and it has this beautiful little red flower that lays right on the ground. You actually have to lift the leaves up. It's pollinated by ants. So and it's one of the oldest of the flowering plants. When they look at the fossil records, it's one of the this clade of plants is one of the first to appear. We have round-lobed hepatica. Hepatica means liver in Latin. And back when they were describing plants, you know, they would describe them after how they looked. They looked like a liver, they would call it, you know, and they also would base things on medicine like that. Well, if it looks like a liver, it's obviously, if you've got liver problems, take these plants. Luckily enough, now we're much more educated, and we just, and we know a lot more about different chemicals and compounds of the plants. So another beautiful spring wildflower, the hepatica, comes up in droves, tons and tons of flowers, and has these beautiful little leaves. It lasts throughout the season. The one next to it is narrow-leaf spring beauty, and it is ephemeral, like the Dutchman's breeches we talked about earlier. So it only comes up for about 5 to 8 weeks every spring. Here's two other ephemerals as well right here. We have the trout lily. The reason they call it the trout lily is it has vermiculations on the leaves or spotting that looks like a brook trout. If you've ever gone for a walk in some of our deciduous forests, it's one of the most common spring ephemerals. You know, forests, thousands or millions of them all over the place. And it's kind of nice when you're walking in April, when you see those come up, you know, spring's here kind of thing. The one next to it is wild leaf. It has big leaves, and it's a lot of the time it's harvested for food. And it's a shame because it takes 6 to 7 years before this plant flowers, and it's short-lived through the grow season. Like, it's only up for that time, as we previously talked about. So it takes a long time for this plant to really put on growth. So I recommend anybody that wants to eat leek just buy the cultivated leek. It's also interesting that the leaves go dormant, and then 3 to 6 weeks later it sends up a flowering stalk and then blooms then. So it's kind of interesting. Some more spring wildflowers are the columbine, which is a great plant. It's red. And red is something that attracts hummingbirds. So when you often go out to a stand of columbines, you'll see a lot of different hummingbirds fighting in them, trying to get at the nectar and stuff. They're also a larval host of the columbine dusky-wing as well. So they're a great larval host for that species of butterfly. The one next to it is a ground cover. It's called Virginia waterleaf. So if you're out in the forest and you see leaves that have what look like little water droplets on them, that's what gives them their name. It's probably Virginia waterleaf, and they produce these beautiful purple flowers that come up, you know, at the end of spring. So it's kind of a nice plant because most of the stuff petered out by the time the water leaf comes up. Some other nice plants to look for. We have so many different ferns, so I'm only going to go over a couple because, you know, most people just enjoy ferns, but, you know, we have so many of them. And they're really interesting because they're one of the more primitive plants. They produce spores, and they have an interesting life cycle, which I won't get into today. But yeah, there's tons and tons of ferns. So nice things to enjoy. You know, we have some sun-loving ferns, and none of them flower, obviously. As I said, they have either spores on the underside of their leaves, or they have a separate structure that comes up that produces spores. So very ancient plants. They were on a planet during, you know, the time of dinosaurs and even before that. So we're going to get into some of the summer wildflowers. And some of these summer wildflowers I'm going to talk about also are blooming in the fall as well. For example, the black-eyed Susan, which is such a great plant because it basically blooms from the beginning of summer right until now. I still have them, you know, blooming around the property now. And they're fantastic, cheery, great pollinator plants. The one next to it is foxglove beard tongue. It finishes usually about, you know, mid-June to July, and it has these beautiful tubular flowers that the hummingbirds like, and also many different species of bees. So we've counted all sorts of different pollinators on both these species. So if you guys like pollinators, these are two great plants to look at and enjoy. We have harebell here, which is much like the black-eyed Susan. It's a plant that's blooming right now, right in the fall. It also starts blooming in June. So it almost acts like an annual. Most perennials only bloom for a week to about 3 weeks, where you have things like the harebell and the black-eyed Susans that just bloom for such a long period of time. The one next to it is the fireweed, another great plant. It's about finished. It's finished now. You'll get the occasional bloom in the fall, but they're pretty well done. It's called fireweed is in the boreal forest. Even though they're found down here, they're often the first plant to come up after a major forest fire. Here's two other summer wildflowers that also bloom into the fall as well. So the cardinal flower, I was out on a hike last week, and there's a bunch blooming on the Massasauga River up in Buckhorn. Beautiful red flowers. The only thing I've ever seen pollinate this plant is hummingbirds. So without the hummingbird, we probably wouldn't have cardinal flowers in Ontario. We've only got one species of hummingbird, that's a ruby-throated. And yeah, they're the only ones I've ever seen pollinated. They're the only ones that can get down and bring pollen from one plant to the next. The one beside it is great blue lobelia, another summer/fall blooming plant. And it grows kind of, as I said, the cardinal flower grows along rivers. The great blue lobelia kind of grows actually in moist forests. So if you're out hiking in the summer or fall in the moist forest, you might actually see the great blue lobelia. Beautiful plant, pollinated by many different things, unlike the cardinal flower. So some more interesting plants. These are all carnivorous plants. So I find it interesting that, a lot of people think these are tropical plants. They're all done blooming at this time of the year. But we have the pitcher plant, which is the one with kind of purpley flowers in the corner there. Unfortunately, when I give the speech to people where I can actually see the people, I can point to the different plants. So we have, in the one corner here, we have pitcher plant, and it eats even frogs. We found it in these poor pitchers, and they grow in peat bogs. So on the Oak Ridges Moraine, where Aileen and Nikki work, there is actually some peat bogs out there on pitcher plants and various carnivorous plants. The one beside it is a butterwort, and they're great plants because they eat fungus gnats. So they really help out with insect populations, these sort of things. And the ones that in the water here, the purple one and the yellow one on the bottom, and the one with the dime, are called bladderworts. They grow in the water, and what you can do is put them, if you have a pond, add them to your pond, and when they'll eat mosquito larvae and stuff. So if your neighbors, come over and complain that you have a pond, and they're like, "Oh, you're bringing us mosquitoes," just say, "I have Utricularia vulgaris doing its job in the pond," and that's what it does. So these plants all live in poor locations and eat bugs. The one on the bottom is a sundew, and that was Darwin's favorite plant. And that was kind of helped him with his theory, or with the theory of evolution. So now we're into what we wanted to talk about, fall wildflowers. Like I said, there's just not enough fall wildflowers here to give you guys an hour presentation. So I had to give you guys some other things so I could engage you for an hour. But one of the great ones are asters. Without asters, the Joe Pye weeds are asters. Goldenrods are asters. Basically, asters are what's producing food for all the wildlife right now, like the birds and the bees and stuff, as far as nectar and pollen goes. So the purple one here is Joe Pye weed. There's a bunch of different species, and they're just fantastic. A nice tall plant, purple flowers, does a great job of providing food and housing for different insects. A lot of insects will actually live in the stems of the Joe Pye weeds because they have somewhat hollow stems that will bore into it. So I always tell people, don't knock your gardens back in the fall. Leave it till the spring because you get a lot of overwintering insects. The one besides heath aster, you're driving down the road, you see all those white plants in the ditches and up the side of the hills and stuff. That's heath aster, fantastic for drought. If you have a really sandy area, you know, that's a plant that just does fantastic, and it's a great when it grows in tall grass prairies and ditches and all sorts of great things. Again, more asters. As I said, it's basically asters and goldenrods. There's a few other things, like I mentioned in some of the summer things, that are still petering out through the fall, but we have the calico aster, which is kind of an edge species, so you can find it, you know, in the forest or out of the forest, and has beautiful little aster-like flowers. So it's interesting with the asters that they look like one flower, but they're actually disc flowers, which are the middle, which is the brown part in the middle, or the yellow, and then the other ones are called ray flowers. So there's actually, you know, 100 to 200 flowers that make up one aster flower, and that's kind of an interesting tidbit that I learned when I was at school. This one here is a smooth aster. It's got beautiful blue colors. You'll often see those again on the side of the road. So these plants are great at this time of the year. If you're in the forest, there's large-leafed aster, and the large-leaf aster has really big heart-like leaves, forms ground covers. You're in the forest, you might see large-leaf asters, and it's nice because a lot of insects that prefer being in the shade don't have a lot of food come the summer and the fall. So it's good when you have things like blue lobelia and large-leaf aster, which really help out on their on giving them the food that they require. The one next to it's a tall grass prairie species, a sky blue aster, or alvar. You know, places that are really dry and you know, the soil dries out and quite sunny, not a lot of competition, and they're, you know, really beautiful plant because they have such a nice, you know, light color blue. We have some more fall wildflowers, the New England aster, which I'm sure if you live in Ontario, you're really familiar. You know, driving down the road, you see the tall goldenrod and the New England aster, the purple and yellow combination. The New England aster is a fairly tall plant, but it's beautiful. The one next to it is called sneezeweed. It's another type of aster. It doesn't make you sneeze, nor is it a weed. It's kind of uncommon. They call it Helen's flower sometimes in the nursery trade, so people don't get scared off by it. A lot of people think sneezeweed and goldenrods cause allergies, but that's not really the case. What happens is you have to have a plant that has wind-blown pollen, like a lot of grasses, a lot of tree species, and those are the ones that cause allergies. Things that have beautiful flowers need an insect or a bird or some sort of other pollinator to actually physically remove the pollen and bring them to another species or another like plant. Gentians, love the gentians for fall colors. I was out walking this morning and saw a pile of bottle gentians. Beautiful plant. They have a closed flower. So there's not many species of pollinators that can get into them, mostly bees, bumblebees of the bombus genus that can actually push the corolla part of and be able to actually get into the flowers and pollinate them. So, and just gorgeous, and they bloom basically right up to about mid-October. Come mid-October, November, things are pretty well dormant by then. So our fall is very limited here where I am anyways, or in Toronto, where you've only got like about a month of blooms before everything just starts to go down once you start getting multiple frosts. The one beside it is fringe gentian. It's one of the few plants in the species that's actually biennial. The biennial is a plant that only, you know, lives for 2 years. It germinates the first year, flowers the second, and then dies. But it's another gorgeous species of gentian, and they're in full effect right now, the fringe and bottle gentians. So try to get out for a hike. Goldenrods. A lot of people don't like the goldenrods, but believe it or not, in Ontario we have about 15 or 20 different species, and there's lots of goldenrods that aren't aggressive and are well behaved. For example, here we have the zigzag. That's a forest dwelling one, and it'll grow well and forms, you know, clumps in good habitat, but it's a great forest dwelling goldenrod. The one beside it is grass-sleeved. Again, it's not a super aggressive goldenrod. The real aggressive goldenrods are the tall goldenrods. Those are the ones you see in the ditch. The grass loop grows in meadows. We have here the gray goldenrod, which is a little tall grass prairie. You can see the sand, it's growing in sand. It's a small goldenrod, only gets up to 2 feet, has kind of a gray stem on it, and it's a well-behaved goldenrod. So those are different ones you can see going on your fall hikes. There's a lot of great books. If you really want to get into goldenrods, they're kind of hard to identify, but once you start looking at them, they're not too bad. But there's some great books. So anybody feel free to email me, and I'll send you some ideas for books you could pick up. The one besides early goldenrod, it actually starts blooming in the summer and then blooms right through the fall. Again, kind of a tall grass, kind of a dry area goldenrod, not super aggressive. Believe it or not, we have some white goldenrods. And the two I have right here are both kind of rare. We have the silver rod. And it is beautiful, and it's basically only found in tall grass prairies. And it's a rare goldenrod. It's very well behaved. It only gets up to 2 feet tall. So, sometimes you'll be hiking and you'll see these little white things, and they can actually be goldenrods, even though they look more like an aster. The one beside it is another tall grass or alvar species, again, kind of poor soil. And it's called the upland white goldenrod. So I'm just going to quickly just go through these. I'm not going to do the trees and shrubs today. I'm just going to go through those quickly, and then we're going to talk about invasive species, and then we're going to end our presentation on a negative note. So the reason I really like to get people interested in going out and looking at their native species is because of all the invasive species. Basically, Southern Ontario, or most of North America now, has basically been cleared. There's lots of development, and we brought in all these different invasive species from all over the place, and these places are under a lot of threat. So it's really good that we donate to these different land conservancies and try to promote using native species, so we don't introduce any more crazy things like the purple loosestrife here, or the emerald ash borer, or the Asian longhorn beetle. And that's really what got me into to native plants was these invasive species, and how they just don't provide the same food and the same nutrition that other species, that these insects and animals and everything have adapted. So the first one is periwinkle. Periwinkle is one that I've found. I do botany surveys, and I've found forests with 5 to 10 acres of it. It just keeps spreading and spreading and spreading every year, and it produces chemicals. It's from Europe, and these chemicals actually prevent the germination of other plant species. And what was a diverse forest with 40 or 50 different plants, now it's become a monoculture with some sugar maples and some big trees, and it really doesn't allow the germination of a lot of other things. The way this is spread is a lot of people will rake these up from their yard and dump their yard waste into a natural area. I like to mention that so people don't dump their yard waste into natural areas, and because you can introduce seed or cuttings from the periwinkle or any other garden plants that you have. So yeah, periwinkle, not a very nice plant. Looks beautiful. If you like it, try wild blue flower. Purple loosestrife. Here's the, I guess, the poster child for invasive species. They've tried to control it by introducing various beetles from the same localities that it came from originally. And those beetles have adapted now to eat some of our native loosestrifes. So it's kind of like, it really didn't make any sense. In the long term, we're kind of learning that maybe, it's better to just let these things run its course. But purple loosestrife, albeit beautiful, is quite aggressive in certain wetland situations. If you like this plant, you could use dense blazing star. It actually makes great honey. I did a speech for a beekeeper's thing, and they gave me loosestrife honey, which was good. Although I couldn't tell the difference between loosestrife honey and any others, but it was good. Here's probably the most invasive species in Ontario. I read that it was actually brought in, called the dog strangling vine, because of the fluffs. They're going to use it to stuff pillows and everything where they could have just used common milkweed. It was brought in the Ottawa Experimental Station, and it's basically run down Highway 7 And if you go to Toronto, there's, 10, 20, 30, 40 acres of just forest, just covered in it, and meadows or whatever. It grows everywhere. It's very, very tolerant of different moisture. And it's a member of the milkweed family, or the dogbane family, which are the same family, depends on the authority. And if a monarch butterfly is flying around the area and can't find a milkweed, they may dump their eggs on the dog strangling vine, which doesn't allow the insect to reach maturity on it, the caterpillar. It can't do their instars and stuff. So you can really see that you had a forest that had 20 or 30 or 40 different species, and now you have virtually nothing, and it's not very good for insects. They're very hard to eradicate too. Garlic mustard, here's another one they brought in. So I think to myself, people go and buy these neat plants from different garden centers or wherever, and the next thing you know, you could have some plants that just end up doing really well. They brought garlic mustard in for food. I ate it once. It was absolutely horrible. I don't know who would eat it. It's a biennial. Some of our Virginia white butterflies, which would lay their eggs on native mustards, will lay them on here, and like the dog strangling vine, do not offer the same nutritional value. So as you can see the bottom picture here, it's just, this is a forest that had all sorts of great, asters and different plants, and now it's basically just, leftover trees with virtually no regeneration of little trees, and it's just garlic mustard. So, outweed, another one. The only way to get rid of this plant is to move. I know someone who tried burning it. They sprayed it with Roundup. They did everything to it. They put cardboard down. They couldn't win. So they still live with it to this day. It's been a 20-year fight. So people buy it as snow in the mountain. It's a member of the carrot family, and it's really hard to get rid of. So this is one that they brought in for the garden trade, just like the periwinkle and the garlic mustard. Our least favorite tree here is Norway maple. You can't get spring ephemerals to grow on it. It leaves out 2 weeks earlier than our sugar maples or our silver maples or any of our other native maples, and it has surface roots. So it sucks all the moisture from the soil. They are a beautiful tree. They get black spot this time of the year, and they really aren't very good for wildlife, and it's really hard to grow things under them. If you want to tell if you have a Norway maple, if you're unsure, you can cut the stem. If the sap bleeds white, it's a Norway maple. My last slide. This is the buckthorn, and it's an invasive species. And I was doing this speech for a different group, and a lady was like, "This isn't a chokecherry," and I was like, "No, this is a buckthorn." And she was like, "Oh, well, I made everybody jam with this." And I said, "Well, the Latin name is cathartica, and that means laxative." So luckily enough, we prevented her from giving this jam. And I thought to myself, those berries stink. I can't believe she actually picked those and made jam with them. But this species is just super aggressive. On my property, we have 73 acres out here, and I've got a couple acres. I fight them every year, and it's kind of a losing battle. But they are a laxative, so don't eat them. Don't eat anything if you don't know what they are. I really appreciate all of your time. I'm going to pull up my last slide, which just has my email address and stuff. And that way, if you have any questions or you want some slides about, different plants that attract butterflies, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for that presentation. We didn't get too many questions, but we do have one that maybe you can take some time with. We do have time for you to cover it well. So I don't know if you can see, or maybe I'll just read it to you. So Maria says that she is considering doing overwinter outside, growing in pots. and she was wondering if you could go over that topic. She says that she has trouble doing it inside growing from seeds, so she's doing it over winter outside growing in pots.
Okay, so she wants to just sow the seeds in a pot over the winter. Okay, yeah, I can go over that.
Yeah,
And she's in Ottawa. Sorry, she wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah,
Oh, she's in Ottawa. Okay. Yeah, the best is to put chicken wire or something really dense over the pot with the seeds, because there's a lot of rodents that'll dig up the seeds over the winter. So she wants to do that. She also would want to protect it. The other way she do it is put it in a garage, if she has a garage or a cold cellar somewhere like that too, that she could do it. But yeah, the big thing is preventing rodents from getting them, and also from a lot of freezing and thawing. So sometimes I'll actually put a layer of leaves over, chicken wire or something, so the rodents can't get in them, and then I put leaves over top of them, and then hopefully they'll germinate in spring. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right. She asks, do I need to water it if it is in the garage?
Yes. Yes. Once it freezes, it'll be fine. It's not going to, but you still have sublimination, where even ice will, if it's in a dry place, will subliminate. So yeah, she will have to water it. Definitely. Not too wet, but yeah, definitely water.
Okay, great. And if anybody else has any questions, now would be the time to ask. You can either use the chat box or the Q&A. And Maria says thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll give everyone another minute or so, but like Paul said, you can email him or you can visit his website. Aileen, were you about to say something?
No, I did post the email and Paul's website in the chat box. The website has all kinds of great information on it. And Paul, can you just clarify, you do sell native plants for people. How would they go about getting them from you? How does that work?
Yeah, you can just send me an email or call me and let me know what they'd like, and we can get them for them. Or if there's somewhere else, like that's farther away, I know a bunch of other nurseries I can send information to for them as well. So yeah, just send me a call or an email.
All right, and it looks like we have another question from Karen. She's asking,
Sure. What
are the native mustards that Virginia white butterfly larvae require?
what is that called again? I'm drawing a blank here. I'm really sorry about that. It's the two-leaf toothwort and the cut-leaf toothwort, Cardamine diphylla. So they're a native mustard that grows in the forest, and so the Paris white and the Virginia white butterflies normally lay their eggs on that. But we've been finding that they've been laying on the garlic mustards quite frequently. So yeah, it's the toothworts, the cut-leafed and the two-leaf toothworts. If she's interested, I don't sell them, but I'm sure she could find seed or try them out herself.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Oh, okay. Great. So I think that looks like it's it for questions. So Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. And for everyone else, because the numbers are going up with COVID, as Nikki mentioned, we're going to be switching to more online and having some other great speakers like Paul come out. But one of our nature reserves we're very fortunate, it's got some nice trails on it. So we are looking at continuing some in-person events, but not as groups, almost self-guided, where you book a time and you're in your own group with your own bubble, and you guys go out and do it like more of a self-guided hike. So we're looking into getting that up and running, especially over the winter, so we're not cooped up inside. And you still get to learn about, animal tracks or maybe tree winter ID, things like that. So stay tuned. We are oakridgesmoraine.org, and if you click on the action, you'll see the event page. Or you can join our mail list, and we'll let you know when these things happen. What we're trying to do also is limit it to kind of exclusive events, because we don't want too many people. So by joining the email list, it also gives you that kind of insight. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you, Paul. That was great. I always learned something. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
everybody have a wonderful night. Please stay safe out there. And now's a great time to plant native plants. So
yeah, go out and do some fall hiking.
Yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous out there. No mosquitoes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's
They love
brilliant.
me,
Yeah.
so I love when they're not around. So thanks everybody. Have a wonderful night, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Take care.